So this story is back in the news. I wanted to cover misconceptions because there's a big myth going around that you can get potential jail time for violating the Clean Air Act.
Being that it's a criminal violation, at times when it's really egregious, we have the ability to take folks to jail. So you could potentially go to jail for this.
And I want to just say right now that that is absolutely not true. Starting off, I would like to disclose that I am not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. This video is for entertainment purposes only and should not be viewed by anybody. Right here I have a copy of the Clean Air Act. Before we get into this, I want to cover some basic topics. Specifically, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which gives Congress the ability to do such things such as collect taxes, create post offices, etc. Specifically known as the Commerce Clause, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So this gives Congress the ability to create legislation to regulate commerce, both interstate and intrastate, so between states and within a state. And so how is this done? So essentially you have Congress, both the House and the Senate, and they create legislation, in this case the Clean Air Act. And then that legislation is accepted by the president, right? And then the president goes ahead and creates an executive agency to enforce that legislation. So in this case, the executive agency would be the EPA. You can kind of think of them as the cops. And the rule book, the legislation, would be the Clean Air Act. So with those two concepts in mind, let's go ahead and look at the Clean Air Act. Here in Section 7401, Congress finds that the predominant part of the nation's population is located in its rapidly expanding metropolitan and other urban areas, otherwise known as cities, which generally cross the boundary line of local jurisdictions and often extend into two or more states. Growth in the amount of the complexity of air pollution brought about by the increasing use of motor vehicles has resulted in mounting dangers to the public health and welfare. The next important part is this paragraph, that the air pollution prevention is primarily the responsibility of states and local governments. That's a very important concept. It's the purpose of this act, or protect and enhance the quality of the nation's air resources so as to promote the public health and welfare and the productive capacity of the population. And lastly, the last main concept is pollution prevention. So a primary goal of this chapter is to encourage or otherwise promote reasonable federal, state, and local government action for pollution prevention. So what is the main issue in question? Right here we're looking at Section 7522 for prohibited acts specifically for motor vehicles. And so it's important to know that this mainly deals with the manufacturer of new vehicles. Ford, Chevy, Dodge. Clean Air Act mainly regulates manufacturers. The main legislation in question that we're looking at is Section 7522A3B. So if you manufacture, sell, or install devices to defeat emission systems of the Clean Air Act, this is the section that you would be charged under. And so this is probably the most applicable part of this video, giving that, and we're jumping back to the start here, that the administrator only has the authority to levy civil penalties for violations that occur under the Clean Air Act, right? Civil penalties, not criminal. So you cannot go to jail, only civil. So if we jump back to the motor vehicle section, we look at civil penalties specific to the motor vehicle violations. Civil, so fines, not imprisonment. And so a lot of these penalties are geared towards manufacturers, but the specific one we're looking at is 7522A3B. So any person who violates that section of this title, the Clean Air Act, shall be subject to a civil penalty of not more than $2,500, and this is per each violation, so each part or component. So you can see how that could definitely rack up the dollars very quickly. But the point I'm trying to make is to dispel the myth that you will go to jail if you violate the Clean Air Act. That is not true. These are civil penalties only, civil. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean the government can't ruin your life. Obviously, they can find other laws to charge you with. That's typically a given. The state may have specific laws that they can charge you with. So there's a whole bunch of shenanigans that could go in place that can definitely ruin your life. And so the other big myth I'd like to, expel is the idea that the Clean Air Act can be enforced on you as a person by the federal EPA, and that is just not true. The Commerce Clause regulates commerce. So if you are doing this for yourself, so you make a part and you do it on your own, that has nothing to do with commerce, and thus these regulations do not apply to you. But we need to remember that pollution control is the responsibility of the states and local governments. So if your local government wants to penalize you separately of the EPA Act, that's up to them. So the big issue was that this was started with some guy in Wyoming, where the state and local government did not have an issue. It was the federal government. So know your local laws, but just know that the EPA is not going to come out after you as a person. Now, if you're doing this as a mechanic or a tuner or a manufacturer, that's actually absolutely fair game. And just because Trump pardoned 9 people does not mean that he will pardon you, or if a future president will either. Because the president of the United States has no authority to change the Clean Air Act. Only Congress does. So this section of the Clean Air Act is still valid. Just because they're not enforcing it doesn't mean it's not still there. If you're a mechanic, tell the customer to go install it themselves. Because for you, the mechanic, it's a $2,500 violation. So you won't be going to jail, but that's still pretty expensive. So, will you go to jail in California? Maybe. I don't know their laws. In Wyoming? Most likely not. And just know that would be state prison, not federal prison.